Welcome to Capitol View on WSIU. I'm Jeff Williams, sitting in this week as we take a look at what's making news around the state in Illinois politics. A first-generation Mexican-American woman from Chicago recounted her story during a public hearing in Washington, D.C. this week of being shot 5 times by Customs and Border Patrol agents last October in Chicago as part of the federal immigration and enforcement effort. Also, Governor J.B. Pritzker is dusting off his plan to shore up the state's pension system. We'll take a closer look at those stories and probably some more this week on Capitol View. To help us lead our discussion are Hannah Meisel, State House and Chicago reporter for Capitol News Illinois, and Jason Piscia, director of the Public Affairs Reporting Program at the University of Illinois, Springfield. Welcome back to the program.
Good to be here.
As you mentioned, Marimer Martinez testified on Tuesday during a public hearing in Washington about her experience last October when she was shot in her community by Border Patrol agents as part of Operation Midway Blitz. She has been labeled a domestic terrorist by federal officials, yet all charges were dropped against her. I guess in some ways it's a narrative that is becoming familiar surrounding the enforcement efforts in Illinois and in Minnesota and other states. Governor Pritzker's Accountability Commission has held its second hearing late last week and issued its first report documenting misconduct by federal immigration enforcement. What do stories like Martinez's say about this enforcement effort that admittedly does have legitimate goal of arresting violent criminals and those that are here illegally or under false pretenses? But overall, what does this say about this enforcement effort, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of Americans, especially in the wake of the 2 fatal shootings in Minneapolis in January, Alex Preddy and Renee Good, 2 U.S. citizens who were shot to death in their car and on a sidewalk as they were trying to, basically record federal immigration agents, carrying out their deportation duties. But, I think a lot of Americans have, if they weren't already very concerned or, outright against the immigration efforts by the Trump administration, I think a lot of Americans have woken up to just kind of how not in control these 2 agencies are. Customs and Border Patrol specifically has been known as the more, aggressive, wing of the Department of Homeland Security. Its kind of counter agency is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. I want to remind viewers that it's not normal for Customs and Border Patrol to be on the interior of the nation. For much of their modern life, it's been at the U.S. southern border specifically, and that's why it's kind of developed a more aggressive approach in training its agents, because at the border, it's more. It's a lot more black and white. If you see people trying to cross the border, it's a lot more, it's a lot easier to assume that they might be undocumented, that they might be coming across the border without permission. Whereas ICE has been, since its inception in, 20 years ago, it has been in cities in the interior of the country and has used a lot more discretion. And that's why we haven't seen people who have been in the nation for 30 years, setting up their own businesses, paying taxes, being deported at this level. But the Trump administration has turned a lot of, immigration enforcement on its head and has, interpreted, changed longstanding norms and told officials to go after undocumented immigrants, no matter how long they've been in the country, no longer, basically to interpret any of them as criminals. And I think that the two shootings in January got a lot of attention, much more than Miramar Martinez in Chicago on October 4th, for a lot of reasons. I think that Minneapolis has been, unique for a lot of reasons. And, frankly, I think also that those two victims were white. Miramar Martinez, though she is a US citizen, frankly, she is part of a community. I think that also at the time, you know, attention was split, whereas in January, kind of all eyes were on Minneapolis. But I think it's been really, really interesting to see, Americans' opinions shifting. And if you were kind of nonplussed by the whole thing before, I think a lot of people are growing a lot more concerned. As to the Illinois Accountability Commission, again, this is something that the governor had called for in the fall to kind of give a backward-looking investigation on, what possible human rights abuses occurred during Operation Midway Blitz, which began in September and, tapered down in mid-November in the Chicago area. However, officials say it's not over. It's just maybe at a lull right now. The commission had its second meeting on Friday, as we're taping this on Wednesday, February 4th. They have a couple more meetings in their future. But, one of the things that I found really interesting, a colleague, to be clear, I was not there, our colleague covered it, but in reading her coverage, one of the witnesses that testified said that since 2005, there have been 5,000 Customs and Border Patrol agents who have been arrested. This a lot of the arrests have occurred in their personal lives and their downtime. But I think that's another kind of data point that a lot of people are concerned about the caliber of people who are being recruited to ICE and to Border Patrol, to agencies that, of course, their budgets have exploded under the Trump administration, with Stephen Miller's goal to deport something like 3,000 people a day. It's also been reported over and over again that the training time for these agents has been cut from something like 6 months to just 6 weeks. And so, there's definitely a lot of concern about, who is being recruited, and the training that they're being given, and, what things could go wrong. Because clearly we've now seen several incidents that can go wrong. And one more thing I would like to say about Miramar Martinez's case, the federal prosecutors brought charges against her after, they alleged that she was boxing in agents with her car. And, she says she was merely following them and recording, as she is legally allowed to do. But after she was shot 5 times, in this altercation, she was charged, and then eventually, maybe a month later, a judge dismissed her case without prejudice, or with prejudice rather, meaning that the feds cannot refile the charges. She was labeled a domestic terrorist. She asked during her testimony in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday of this week, just for an apology, and to set the record straight. But one major thing about her case that her lawyers have tried to do, and her lawyer and I spoke last week, and what I was kind of mind blown by is that the feds had asked that evidence in her case about DHS internal policy about what happens during, after a shooting. That was part of the case, and that was kind of placed, for lack of a better term, under seal for lawyers' eyes only. And it would really help, her lawyer says, for this information to be made public, because right now, only people within DHS and, this very small group of people who are working on Miramar Martinez's case are privy to that information. But if it were made public, then the entire country would know about what DHS's internal policy is on shootings, and it would help shed a lot more light on what happened in Alex Pretty's case, in Renee Good's case, and a handful of other cases that have gone on, shooting of people, for the most part, who have survived. But Mira Martinez shot 5 times. She'll always have those scars.
I want to shift the focus on this just a little. Jason, we heard about we've seen the role that what we may refer to as citizen journalism, what cell phone videos are playing in getting this story out. We've seen the federal agencies taking to social media to produce their perspective on what is happening. As someone who trains journalists at the graduate level to report on government and to report on public affairs, gosh, what kind of teachable moment has this entire experience become? And I guess maybe also, is it changing? Has it changed the way that we as the media report on these kind of events?
Yeah, it's a tough situation to be in for journalists, and especially for young journalists. I think at the beginning of our careers, journalists can be a little bit timid and want to fit in and want to make your sources happy, so they'll continue to give you information. But situations like this have really caused us all to think about how we should approach the situation and sort of turn it on its head. We're worried about the what we see. We see videos of Alex Pretty and what happened in Minnesota, and we have the administration trying to tell us something different than what our eyes are seeing. So we encourage journalists. I know we encourage journalists to listen to your sources and look for the other side, and make sure you're getting all sides of the story. But sometimes one side, you're very doubtful that there is truth and veracity in what's being said. So I tell my students to trust your own gut, look for other ways to confirm information if it seems like what people are telling you aren't true. And then the other side of it is just what rights press have to begin with. We saw stories this past week and weekend about Don Lemon getting arrested while covering a rally in Minnesota, and brought up a lot of issues of press freedom and what right reporters have to do their jobs, to document what government is doing and hold government officials accountable for what they're doing. And it's, like I said, it's very easy for young journalists to become intimidated by what's going on and willing to step back and listen to what the authorities say. But I encourage my students to know their rights. And if they're not sure what their rights are, know how you can get a hold of a lawyer or an editor or a superior to help you define what those rights are. So we can all know that you are allowed to be there to record what's going on, and journalism isn't a crime.
Yeah. I know personally, just watching it, as a old school journalist, I was always taught, you as a reporter are not the story, and not to insert yourself in the story, and just to kind of see this happen and how this has kind of turned things in the focus around is just a little bit troubling, but I guess also kind of part of the reality that we live in.
Definitely, yeah. It's like it's an ongoing. We're developing this advice as we go along. Journalism really hasn't seen anything like this in modern times, and we have to adapt and get students ready. Even though they're right here, my students are here in Springfield, and not facing the kind of adversity journalists are seeing in Minnesota and elsewhere in Chicago. They have to be ready for wherever they go, because the political divide is tough and it's intense, and we have to cover it.
Well, let's not also forget that, in 2016, when he was running, and in 2017, the early months of the first Trump administration, the president himself labeled journalists, the enemy of the people. And so we've been living in a different dynamic for a decade. And, frankly, I don't think that newsrooms have quite figured out how to manage this dynamic, because it's ever changing. And but we we do need to make every effort to, figure it out, and to, build public trust. And, public trust, frankly, a lot of in journalistic institutions lost public trust over many decades for, good reasons. And we need to figure out ways to rebuild that public trust or reach to readers, listeners who were never, engaged in the first place.
Sure, sure. Want to take this opportunity, kind of shift our focus a little bit. There is a legislative session going on. The governor this week dropped or dusted off, you could say, his 2024 plan to reform and fully fund the state's pension system by 2048. I think it's about, 48% or so funded now. There's also concern over the what is known as the state's Tier 2 pension system, and that it's providing adequate benefits and compliance with Social Security requirements. This plan didn't go anywhere in 2024. It hasn't, I don't think the General Assembly's even taken up any significant pension reform in the intervening time. We're into a new session, but why now? Is there added importance as why we're potentially focusing on this now? Is this something that may actually get some traction this session?
Well, I think lawmakers are facing another tough budget year, and the governor is trying to, shore up basically confidence with Wall Street. One of the first things that he did as governor back in 2019, I think it was like March of 2019, a couple months after he'd been sworn in, was fly to New York and meet with several credit rating agencies. And he touts at every possible, time when he's talking about Illinois' finances that the state has had, I think, 9 or 10 credit rating upgrades since then, across the 3 major credit rating agencies. Pensions are a big thing that these credit rating agencies pay attention to. Illinois is, far and away the state with, pensions in the worst shape, despite the progress we've made. Illinois is just such an outlier at its unfunded pension liabilities. So the governor bringing back this idea, not a surprise. I don't necessarily think it's added urgency. When you talk about the Tier 2 pensions, basically, back in 2010, when Illinois was kind of struggling to make its way out of the Great Recession, and Illinois' unfunded pension liabilities were creeping up to $100 billion. Democrats, but really was a kind of a bipartisan effort, created this new pension system that any public employee, including teachers, including university employees, including municipal workers, hired after January 1st, 2011, would receive basically less generous pension benefits to kind of counterbalance the really generous pension benefits that had been, a perk of the trade-off of being a public employee, that you're not paid particularly well during your career, but the promise is that you're going to have a very secure retirement. They also raised the retirement age, but the concern is that, not a lot of people are retiring yet under this Tier 2 system unless they kind of had a second career and joined, the public workforce, and then, at this point would have spent the last 14 years of their career or so until retirement. The concern is that these benefits are they're so much smaller that they might actually be less generous than Social Security benefits. When you are a public employee, you can't also pay into Social Security and claim that at the end of your career. And so if you are getting less generous benefits than Social Security, the worry is that you're going to violate this safe harbor kind of stipulation. Again, not a lot of people are retiring yet. I think that there's going to need to be a lawsuit to really, really force the state's hand on this. But it is a worry when we think about, getting Illinois' budget out of balance yet again. I remember being a young reporter and living through the state's 2-year budget impasse. We've come a long way since then, but still there's a lot of concerns that remain, and another recession could really set us a lot, very much backward.
Yeah, Jason. I think the Senate's in what, a couple of days this week. The Senate and the House both haven't yet met, and I think that doesn't happen until the week after next, getting ready for the governor's state budget address on February 18th. Anything of substantial moving right now, or do you think budget's probably going to be the main priority of this session, at least till we get to the primary?
Yeah, as we've talked about, pensions remains on people's minds, and definitely the budget. The governor gives his budget address in 2 weeks' time, where he'll set out his spending priorities for the year ahead, and hope that the legislature listens to those. But yeah, you're right. Until then, I don't think the House and the Senate have been in Springfield on the same day yet this year. I think that happens the week of the budget address. The Senate's, like I said, in this week. I think the House was in next week. But it's been not much happening. There was some hearings that were scheduled for this week in the Senate. I know some of them have already been canceled, and they'll probably go home early like they usually do. There's talk about it's normally, this is not unheard of. It's normally rather quiet in the weeks before a primary election. Everyone's busy worried about getting reelected or getting their friends reelected. So most of the lawmakers will be not in Springfield during that time. But yeah, there's lots of issues to deal with. Pensions, Bears Stadium, we don't know where that's going to go. And the budget is again the big one.
Yeah, and I think there was one of the state reporting agencies was out with a look at some of the January revenue numbers. Is that still kind of a mixed bag for the state, and at least in terms of this fiscal year, and what impact that may have on putting together the FY27 budget?
Yeah, the Commission on Government Forecasting Accountability put out their monthly report to show that state revenue dipped about 3% in January compared to the previous January. And the main reason for it's pretty simple. Federal dollars coming into Illinois have slowed down. This is 3 months in a row now that federal funding's been down. In January, it dropped pretty dramatically, about 35% compared to the same month the previous year. The Commission says, this time around might be timing. Federal payments maybe haven't come in yet, but it's still something that has everyone's attention. Overall, if you look at the whole year, the revenue is actually up about 3.5%. Normally that'd be good news, but because the federal money is so uncertain, it doesn't help ease the pressure on the people putting together the budget. So, on top of all that, President Trump and his administration have been threatening to cut off federal funds to Illinois and other blue states. And, whether he can legally do that or actually will, still tied up in courts. But even that threat makes it tough for lawmakers to plan.
Yeah. Well, we've got about 2.5 minutes or so left this week. So what are each of you looking at or going to be following, paying attention to the next week or weeks ahead?
The primary is coming up so fast. I wanted to highlight my colleagues' good work. They're in the middle of interviewing each candidate, each Republican candidate vying for their party's nomination to be governor. So they'll have interviews out on that, not too far from now, but they've just completed a series of interviews of the 3 state lawmakers and 1 county official who are vying to be Illinois' comptroller. So there are individual podcast interviews with each of them, and then a long kind of analysis on our website, CapitolNewsIllinois.com.
All right, Jason.
Yeah. Also, along with the election, watch your calendars. Early voting actually begins this week, begins on Friday. So if you're anxious to drown out all the noise for the next couple months, you can just vote and get it over with if you want, starting this week. But yeah, and I think that goes along with, we saw that Governor Pritzker finally dropped his money bomb on his Lieutenant Governor, Juliana Stratton, in the Senate race, donated about $5 million to her political action committee that supports her. So she's going to be able to get on TV now pretty consistently. Her main rival and sort of perhaps considered the front runner in that Democratic primary for U.S. Senate is U.S. Rep. Raja Krishnamurthy, who's had a very large fundraising advantage from the beginning and has been on TV, I think, now for 6 months. So it'd be nice to see some of these other candidates sort of get their voices out there and begin to hear what they stand for and begin to hopefully shrink the group of undecideds that's in this race that has made it hard to detect or predict what's going to happen.
Right. Yeah, and there's already been 2 televised debates between the 3 main frontrunners on the Democratic side. And, I also want to mention, I feel like I've mentioned on the show before, but it's a very, very unusual year. In my 13 years watching Illinois government and politics, I've never seen so many congressional seats open. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening at the primary level in all those races too. All
right. We're out of time. My thanks to Hannah Meisel, Capitol News Illinois, and Jason Piscia with the Public Affairs Reporting Program at the University of Illinois Springfield. I'm Jeff Williams. Thank you for joining us this week on Capitol View. Have a good week.